Today I want to share with you the second of three powerful reasons why a former Baptist minister like me started keeping the Sabbath. This decision has deeply enriched my spiritual journey, and I hope my experiences can offer some insight or inspiration to you. The second reason is that Yeshua kept the Sabbath. In Luke chapter 4, verse 16, it says, "And he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up. And as was his custom, he went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day, and he stood up to read." Some will argue that Yeshua worshiped on the Sabbath because he was Jewish. I must admit, as a former and ardent Baptist minister, I too once taught people that Yeshua worshiped on the Sabbath because he was Jewish. However, after reading and studying and praying over the scriptures fervently for clarity and understanding, I have since realized that I totally missed it, and evidence does not support this viewpoint. It first must be understood that Yeshua kept the Sabbath before it was established here on earth. The book of Jubilees offers some key insight. Now, I'm well aware of the centuries-long theological debate regarding it being canonical. F. Bruce, in his book, The Canon of Scripture, even notes that some religious groups once considered it canonical, but that's a topic for another time. The book of Jubilees, chapter 2, verse 30 states, "On this day we kept Sabbath in the heavens before it was made known to any flesh to keep Sabbath thereon on the earth." This verse can be interpreted in several ways. First, this verse sets the heavenly precedent for the Sabbath. The verse communicates that the Sabbath was first observed in heaven by divine beings before it was introduced to humans on earth. We know who those divine beings are, who live in heaven, both the Father Elohim and the Son Yeshua. Psalm 11 and 4 states, "Yahweh is in his set-apart temple. Yahweh is on his heavenly throne." Matthew chapter 6 verse 9 reads, "Our Father in heaven." Isaiah verse 1 and chapter 66 reads, "This is what Yahweh says, heaven is my throne." And in John chapter 20 verse 17, Yeshua supports that his divine home is where his Father is in heaven, when he said to Mary, "Do not hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended to my Father. I am ascending to my Father and your Father, and to my Elohim and your Elohim." Therefore, the book of Jubilees chapter 2 verse 30 initially establishes the Sabbath as a divine and eternal institution, observed by Yahweh and Yeshua in heaven, which predates human practice. It underscores the importance and sanctity of the Sabbath by showing that it is not merely a human tradition, but a spiritual and divine heavenly institution that the Father and Son kept before Elohim established the seventh-day Sabbath and commanded man to keep the Sabbath on earth. Second, the book of Jubilees chapter 2 verse 30 establishes the pre-creation ordinance of the Sabbath. It is clear to me from this verse that the concept of the Sabbath existed in the divine plan even before creation. With an understanding of this, how could the Sabbath's ownership be of a particular group of people? It cannot. And Ezekiel chapter 20 verse 12 confirms ownership of the Sabbath when Yahweh declares, "And I also gave them my Sabbaths." My is the key word. My demonstrates ownership. My relates to Yahweh being the possessor of the Sabbath. The Sabbath is woven into the fabric of the universe, intended by Yahweh to be a day of rest and set apartness from the very beginning. Third, the book of Jubilees chapter 2 verse 30 provides proof text that Yeshua was and still is our divine example of keeping the Sabbath. By stating that the Sabbath was kept in the heavens, the text is emphasizing that Yahweh, Yeshua, and the heavenly beings set an example for humanity to follow. This demonstrates that humans are to emulate the divine practice of worship and rest on the Sabbath day, aligning human behavior with a heavenly form. I will speak on this further later. And fourth, the phrase "before it was made known to any flesh" indicates a moment of revelation when the Sabbath was communicated to humans. This highlights the transition of the Sabbath from a heavenly practice with the Most High and His Son to an earthly commandment as established in Leviticus chapter 23 verse 3, showing a deliberate act of Elohim in making known this sacred time to His creation. So before the word Jewish was uttered on earth, Jubilees chapter 2 verse 30 highlights the pre-existence and divine origin of the Sabbath, which Yeshua was a part of, emphasizing its importance and set apartness as a practice that originated in heaven and was later revealed to humanity. This underscores the Sabbath's significance as a universal and eternal ordinance, integral to both divine and human order. Not only is Yeshua our divine example of Sabbath keeping before the Sabbath was established on earth, but He is our ultimate human example. Yeshua faithfully observed the Sabbath. Why? Because that was His practice in heaven before the foundation of the world. And therefore, when the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, Yeshua just continued His heavenly practice on earth, thus demonstrating ultimate obedience to His Father Elohim. Let's look at several scriptures that provide evidence that Yeshua obeyed the fourth commandment. Luke chapter 4 verse 16 says, "And He came to Nazareth, where He had been brought up, and according to His practice, He went into the congregation on the Sabbath day and stood up to read." This tells us that it was Yeshua's practice to honor the fourth commandment and be in the synagogue on the Sabbath day. Yeshua taught on the Sabbaths. Luke chapter 6 verse 6 says, "And it also came to be on another Sabbath that He entered into the congregation and taught, and there was a man whose right hand was with him." Many like to reference this portion of scripture as an example of Yeshua's miracle working power, and rightfully so. But what they fail to emphasize is that, again, we read that Yeshua Messiah kept the Sabbath and taught on the Sabbath even before He healed this man. We read in Luke chapter 13 verse 10, "And He was teaching in one of the congregations on the Sabbath." Again, Yeshua worshiped and obeyed the Sabbath. And also in Mark chapter 6 verse 2 we read, "And Sabbath having come, He began to teach in the congregation. And many who heard Him were astonished, saying, Where did He get all this? And what wisdom is this which is given to Him, that such miracles are done through His hands?" Now, Mark is not talking about Sunday Sabbath. A lot of people say that the Sabbath has been moved to Sunday. Not in the Bible, it hasn't. Mark is talking about the seventh day Sabbath. We can look at countless scriptures to make the point that Yeshua was a Sabbath keeper. He obeyed the fourth commandment. The scripture tells us that if we are going to abide in Him, we have to walk just as He walked. 1 John chapter 2 verse 6. So when did Yeshua worship His Father? On the Sabbath, according to the fourth commandment. If we are going to abide in Him, we need to walk, not kind of like, but just as He walked. And the sound words of Yeshua Messiah, Paul says, must be obeyed and followed. The scriptures tells us in 1 Corinthians 11:1, become imitators of me, as I also am of Messiah. What does it mean to be an imitator? According to the Webster's Dictionary, an imitator is a follower, a person who adopts the appearance or behavior of another, especially in an obvious way. Simply put, 1 Corinthians chapter 11 and verse 1 is encouraging all believers of the way, or Gentiles who follow and trust in Yeshua, to look to Paul as a model of how to live a life that mirrors Messiah's teachings, emphasizing the importance of role models, leadership by example, and the shared nature of spiritual growth. This way of modeling one's behavior after Paul and Yeshua includes keeping the seventh-day Sabbath, not abolishing it. Yeshua is our perfect example, and he observed the Sabbath faithfully. By following his example, I feel a closer connection to him and strive to live a life that mirrors his teachings and practices. If this message has encouraged you, please share it with your family and friends. Please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and like or follow Saving Grace Torah Ministries on Facebook, Instagram, X, and TikTok. Peace, blessings, and joy from Dr. Christopher Rogers.